And we're pleased now to be joined on this Capital Outlook profile with Senator Affie Ellis in Cheyenne. Senator, welcome. We appreciate your time here today. And what a beautiful home. Thanks for hosting us.
You bet. Welcome.
You've served in the Wyoming legislature since 2017. You were the first Native American woman to serve in the Senate. Affie, why did you want to run?
I think I've always been interested in politics and being involved. I'd spent some time working for former U.S. Senator Craig Thomas and really appreciated the opportunity to work on policy. And I was very content to be a person working for someone else who was in that spotlight. But a kind of well-worn story that I've told folks is my kids really inspired me to run. And looking at the composition of the Wyoming legislature in 2016, realized that we definitely needed more women serving. At the time, there was only one woman serving in the Senate. So after a lot of thought, decided that I would transition from being kind of a behind-the-scenes person to actually being the candidate.
You've talked a lot, too, about I think struggle's the right word, of being a mother to young children and also being a legislator and what that means to serve and to serve well and to be really involved. How do you manage?
I think there's a lot of things that people do in our day, and it really caused me to kind of examine how I spend my time. And so, I will tell you, I watch a lot less TV, which is fine. But it's really kind of your perspective too. If you want to look at it as, this is horrible work and I have to do it, then that's kind of that's how you're going to look at what you're doing. And I really make a conscious effort to feel lucky and fortunate to do all the work that I get to. And so I think that positive energy really, sets the tone with my family, and I know they're proud of me and they're proud to support my work, and I'm just lucky that I have them in my lives.
Let's rewind the timeline a little bit. You grew up in Jackson.
I did.
Learned to swim in Astoria Hot Springs. Is that a true story?
Yeah.
Tell me about your childhood.
So I grew up in Jackson, and my family story is actually really interesting. Both of my parents are Navajo. They grew up on the Navajo reservation. Back in the 1950s, there was a big effort to get Native kids a trade education. So their family sent them to a boarding school in Brigham City, Utah, and it was called the Intermountain Indian School. And at the time, our country, we were just coming out of World War II, we needed more welders. And so my dad came from a Navajo silversmithing family, and so he learned how to weld. And my mom learned general home economic studies, and so she learned how to work in a laundry and clean motel rooms, those kind of jobs. And my dad fortunately got a job in Jackson back in the 50s when it was still very much a rowdy cow town. He sent for my mom, and they started planting roots there, and they were there since the mid-1950s. Back then, my dad owned his own welding shop eventually, but my family, we worked a lot of different jobs. My brother had a small engine company that he did with my dad in their welding shop. My sisters have held a number of jobs, and then I currently have a sister-in-law who has a copy shop called Copyworks.
What was Affie Ellis like in high school?
I was a very serious high school student. I think I didn't know what opportunities were out there. And so,
did you know you want to be a lawyer then?
A little bit, and oddly enough, because of television shows. I think you watch shows like LA Law and, those kind of programs. And I would spend a lot of weekends cleaning rooms with my mom. And I just wondered, what's a way out of this? I don't want to spend my life working a minimum wage job. And it seemed like all those characters on TV didn't have to do that. So I figured college was probably necessary, and then maybe I want to be a lawyer, even though I had no idea what that meant at that time.
And you went to UW?
I did.
What was your undergraduate work in?
Yeah, I started off with a variety of majors like most students, but I ended up doing political science. And at the time, they had an American Indian Studies minor. Now you can major in it. Took a lot of Spanish as well, but those were my two focus areas, were poli-sci and American Indian Studies.
And you ended up at CU Law School?
I did.
Yeah, how did that come about?
Yeah, after graduating from the University of Wyoming, I got a job working for Craig Thomas in Washington, D.C. So we moved out there and really enjoyed my time in Washington, loved the work, but knew I wanted to be back west. So I applied to a few different law schools, the University of Wyoming, University of Colorado, and for whatever reason, CU just seemed to make the most sense for me and my family, and that's where I ended up.
You serve as chairman of the Joint Committee on Tribal Relations, along with Representative Larson, and you're a member of the Navajo Nation. What are the grand challenges in your mind with your background that the state has to work on in the near future relative to its relationship with both the Eastern Shoshone and the Northern Arapaho tribe?
Growing up as a Native person in Wyoming, obviously I was in Jackson. I think there wasn't always an understanding or an awareness of what that meant to be a Navajo person or a Native American person. And so, throughout my life, it's been not only understanding the cultural piece of what that means, but also understanding the legal history of why we're unique. And so even recently had a colleague ask me about the citizenship status of Native people. And I try and equate it to, the fact that we're all members and citizens of Wyoming, and we're also citizens of the United States. We have this dual citizenship. So if you're a tribal member, it's just another level of citizenship. And to understand that completely and thoroughly, we're really talking about understanding history that goes back to contact era of, Spanish conquistadors. And so I really think it's important for people to have that understanding so that they can understand why we are where we are today with how reservations operate and why there are some of those unique challenges that make living on those reservations sometimes difficult.
You spent a lot of your time on the Senate Education Committee. Still serve on the committee today. And you said this at one time about education, that the purpose was to strike a balance between providing quality, equitable education in Wyoming to Wyoming's children and not doing harm to the Wyoming economy when government revenues are down. You've given this a lot of thought. Will Wyoming be able to continue to build its schools? Will Wyoming continue to be able to fund education?
Yes. The answer to both of those is yes. I think we've been very proud and blessed for the fact that Wyoming for the past couple of decades has outpaced and outspent our neighboring states. And, the latest revenue dollars we use are $16,000 per student in Wyoming compared to our neighboring states, which range between $6,000 and on the high end 11, which was North Dakota, $11,000 per student. And so, in those years where we had flush revenue derived from our mineral industry, I don't think people were so concerned about how efficient those dollars were being spent. And certainly as a member of the legislature now, I think we need to be looking for efficiencies. And I think there's a lot of easy, though, miscommunication about our intentions. But I always want to remind folks, my children are the most important thing in my life. I have 3 kids who are in grade 6, 4, and first grade. So I'm in this for the long haul. And I don't want to do anything that's going to hurt I think things that are really effective, and that's having quality teachers. We need to be paying our teachers well. But are there room for efficiencies? Absolutely. And we need to find those. And the difficult balance is the legislature doesn't have the tool of a scalpel to go in there and look for those efficiencies. We just have the hammer or the sword. We just control a big budget. But those spending decisions are done at the local district level. So I've done a lot of work in the last few years to really meet our school board members, our administrative leaders, look at Cheyenne's budget and try and understand that, so I have kind of both sides of the picture.
I see over on credenza, just out of the picture here, a little statue of a trailer. Mm-hmm. Very similar trailer to the one I think that you have.
It is.
You like to camp? Is that one of the family things that you like to do?
I do. I very much like being outdoors, and I think since being elected to the Senate and serving in the legislature, it's a great way to see the state of Wyoming. We travel a lot for the legislature, so I think one of the things that actually brings me a lot of joy is hitching up my trailer to my car and hitting the road. And
what year is the trailer? I've seen pictures of it. Yeah, it's not new.
It's not new. It's a 1963 Shasta, and I've named her Emma. And over the years, I've been renovating her, and so it's been a fun project for me and for my family. And I know a lot of families have big RVs and trailers, but I very much like packing my family of 5 and a dog into this tiny 18-foot trailer. And we're just having great adventures and making great memories.
So I give you one place to go in Wyoming with your family in the trailer.
Okay.
Where are you going?
I will have to give this some thought. I think we've had some of our best times in Wyoming state parks. Gowdy, Guernsey, and Glendo tend to be our favorites. And I think it's because of the location. We did stay in some of the yurts at Guernsey, and those are special little places. And there are a lot of great places off the beaten path in Wyoming, so I highly recommend that. I also love camping in Sinks Canyon.
I got to meet your dog earlier. Mm-hmm. Your dog gets around very well on 3 legs.
Yes.
How did that come about? It must have been really tragic and a tough event for you.
Yeah, we have a dog named Tennessee. We call her Tenny for short, and I think I just heard her collar jingle. Her ears probably perked up. But we have voted as a family on whether or not to get a dog, and I was the only no vote. But after she came into our lives, our kids were taking her for a walk, and unfortunately she got free and got hit by a truck. And so she survived. Our great neighbors just down the street were able to get her to the vet and saved her life. And so, it was an awful day, probably one of the worst days I've had in a long, long time.
You've started the process of learning the Navajo language.
I have.
How's that going?
It's a slow process. Both my parents grew up in fluent homes of Navajo, and unfortunately, their boarding experience, they didn't speak hardly any of it when they left that school.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really a forced issue for those people that are unfamiliar with Native American boarding schools. They were punished severely for speaking their native languages. So growing up, it wasn't something that my parents emphasized for us to know. However, my mom recently passed, and she, in her last month of life or so, started speaking more in the language. It was coming back to her. And listening to her, sing some songs and use that language again really it just filled my heart with a need to try and figure out a way to reconnect with that language. And it's not an easy one. For anyone who's familiar with Navajo, it was a language used during World War II to...
Code talkers comes to mind, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the Navajo code talkers, they used their language to communicate and evade other people from understanding what the United States government was communicating within its armed forces. So I think it's an incredible language and something I'd like to figure out, but it's just a matter of finding the time to do it.
Well, Senator Ellis, it's always been a pleasure to visit with you, and thank you for hosting us in your beautiful
Thanks
home.
for coming.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
By a grant from AARP, serving the needs and providing real possibilities for the over 50 population in Wyoming. AARP Wyoming. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And by Wyoming Humanities, celebrating our heritage, strengthening our democracy, and growing Wyoming's creative and cultural economy for over 50 years. Visit thinkwy.org.